Okay, welcome to Week 5, Part 2, Northern European Art in the 16th Century. So this is the section covering Chapter 22. Chapter 22 explores the 16th century as it played out in Northern Europe, which you will recall includes Germany and the Netherlands, which are Holland and Belgium, and Flanders. The style of art made in Northern Europe during the Renaissance looks quite different, as the influence of ancient Greco-Roman art and the Catholic Church are a lot less significant. The Protestant Reformation. While the Renaissance in Italy was supported and sustained by the Catholic Church, German artists in the 16th century reacted to the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation began on multiple fronts. Your book mentions the reforms proposed by Erasmus, by Henry VIII, and by Martin Luther. Stockstad also mentions that most historians feel the Protestant Reformation began when Martin Luther, shown here in this painting, nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church in 1517. The Protestant Reformation reflected extreme dissatisfaction with many aspects of the Catholic Church, but especially its financial practices. In particular, the selling of indulgences, which you can read more about in the link in the lecture, was highly offensive to Martin Luther. The Reformation deeply divided the Church throughout Northern Europe, including Germany and the Spanish-controlled Netherlands, where the Inquisition and the oppression of Protestantism would soon be underway. What you can see here on the map is a division of Europe as we know it according to the different religions that are prominent at the time. So you can see Roman Catholic is a very large sort of yellow area. Lutheran is a pretty big pink area. And then we have, little pockets of pink here and there for Lutheranism. And then we have other forms of Protestantism like Calvinist and so on popping up in different cities. You can see little dots with different Protestant, Anglican, Lutheran, Calvinist, and sometimes you can see that there are minorities in those cities. Okay, so Matthias Grunewald and Albrecht Dürer. These two German artists have come to represent this religious split between Catholicism and Protestantism in visual terms. Matthias Grunewald created the Isenheim altarpiece for display in the hospital of the Abbey of St. Anthony in Isenheim, Germany. In Northern European fashion, the painted panels were to adorn an intricately carved wooden altarpiece, which you can see here, which was created about 10 years earlier by sculptor Nicholas Hagenauer. The gruesome crucifixion painted by Grunewald in the center panel here was unusual. Christ is displayed with wounds resembling sores. His skin is ashen, even green, and his body seems to suffer from rigor mortis. You can see the stiffened fingers and stiff shoulders and neck. This seemingly depressing image was likely deliberately chosen in order to provide comfort to the diseased residents of the hospital, who were supposed to understand that Christ knew their pain. When opened, the Isenheim altarpiece explodes with light and color. So what you're seeing here is the same altarpiece, but you see how there's a seam here? It's going to open up to the left and to the right, and then this is what you see. So with all the color and light, these panels depict happier moments in the life and the passion of Christ. The resurrected Christ is now golden-haired in the last panel and has clear skin with a rainbow-colored mandala. Grunewald's work has an overall thematic scheme that reminds us of early Northern Renaissance altarpieces, but incorporates an emotional quality to the life cycle of Christ that its viewers could relate to and draw hope from. Albrecht Dürer traveled widely and studying the works of Italian artists internalized the Italian Renaissance concept of genius. In his self-portrait, he presents himself in an Italian manner, in a triangular composition. However, Dürer's most famous and profitable works were in a very German art form, printmaking. Let's take a look at some of those. Lots of interesting ones. Dürer created woodcut images for the Apocalypse, an edition of John the Divine's Revelation that was being published with the newly invented printing press. A Protestant sympathizer, Dürer would have understood the importance of excuse me, of this new invention to the distribution of Protestant materials. Dürer was a Protestant supporter, but was conflicted by Protestant iconoclasm, or disdain of graven images used in worship. And yet, in 1947 publication of Apocalypse seems to be the sort of reactionary, superstitious, and Catholic work that Protestants sought to distance themselves from. Many believed that the Last Judgment would occur in the year 1500, much like how some people panicked about the turning of the year 2000. The Apocalypse publishers sought to capitalize on this, and did so quite successfully. The book appears to have been reprinted at least twice, and once even after the passing of the year 1500. The book was illustrated with Dürer's highly detailed black and white print images, crafted in the printing art form woodblock. The most famous of the images, the Four Horsemen, has become the canonical way of presenting the Revelation's bringers of death. See a few more images from the Apocalypse here. And if you go to the online lecture, you can see a link that'll take you to a lot more pages. The political, economic, and religious landscape of the Netherlands in the 16th century can be accurately described in one word: tumultuous. And yet, even with this upheaval, Netherlandish cities like Antwerp and Den Bosch became important artistic centers supported by a growing art market. With the growing influence of Protestantism, artists had to search outside of the church for commissions, which led to significant changes in the subject matter. Even so, private patrons commissioned familiar works at times. Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, for example, is a triptych with side panels that closed. This gives it the appearance of an altarpiece, even though it isn't. The similarity that was perhaps intended as irony by the private aristocratic patron maybe a bit have been intended, maybe not. You can read an interpretation of the garden on pages 699 to 670 of your textbook. Other artists incorporated new subjects into their repertoires, especially those who worked in areas that were sympathetic to the Reformation. Lucas Cranach the Elder was a favorite artist of Martin Luther. He painted Luther's portrait that we saw at the beginning of the lecture. And like many Protestant artists, he adopted an ideology of humanism. This extended to using Italianate humanistic motifs in his artwork. Cranach used the Venetian and Italian sleeping Venus motif that we see here in his Nymph of the Spring. Cranach's German version is typically Northern European, with its minute attention to surface detail in nature, like every blade of grass being highly detailed, and its lack of realism in the anatomy of the figure. Portraits, still lifes, landscapes, and morality narratives. Flemish and Dutch artists increasingly found recently wealthy patrons in need of artists. Commissions of the 16th century had artists more frequently painting portraits, still lifes, and other kinds of artworks for private rather than clerical patrons. Catharina von Hemissen was a successful portrait artist of Antwerp. Wealthy Protestant patrons also enjoyed landscape, which was a relatively new subject. In the 15th century, landscapes had only appeared as background for biblical and historical scenes. Now, along with portraits and morality narratives, landscapes were becoming among the most important subjects for painters to master. You can see a nice landscape by, let's find Albert Altdorfer. Here we go, an Albert Altdorfer German landscape. Now, oftentimes artists would combine morality narratives or stories with landscapes, as in Peter Bruegel the Elder's Fall Vicarus. Fall was representative of a growing genre of paintings that focused on everyday activities. This and other works by Bruegel remind us of the early Renaissance work of the Lamberg brothers and their images of peasants in February, which you can see in the first chapter of your book. Interest in the average person as an art subject will continue to grow in Northern Europe in the 17th century. Here you can see another piece that depicts everyday people by Bruegel. and another. And my favorite peasant wedding, the little kid eating a piece of bread. Marinus von Rammerswale's banker and his wife is a version of the mismatched couple. This is a theme that was growing in popularity in Northern Europe. This morality story exploits the general dislike of bankers among the masses. At the same time, it serves as an interesting still life, a genre that will gain even more popularity in the next century. In Quentin Mass's version, the morality tale takes on a more judgmental tone and utilizes Northern-style iconography, acute detail, and traditional visual devices to get the message across. In this version, the banker's wife thumbs, seemingly bored, through a book of hours while the banker counts the gold. You can read Stockstad's interpretation of the complex moral message of this piece on page 703 of your textbook. Tudor Portraits of England. Hans Holbein the Younger remains perhaps the most famous of Netherlands-based painters of the 16th century for his Tudor England works. Having yanked control of the arts from the churches and monasteries of England, the Protestant Henry VIII looked to the Netherlands rather than Italy for a well-established portraitist. Holbein created the most famous painting of Henry VIII, which you can see on the screen. The Tudor court preferred the highly polished realism of Northern European artists, who tended to focus on details of fabrics, skin, hair, and other surface features over musculature or anatomy. Holbein created many different portraits for the court. These included the portrait of the short-lived only son of Henry VIII, Prince Edward, and portraits of several queens and would-be queens of the king. You can see several of Holbein's Tudor portraits linked in the lecture, along with a rather sad portrait of his wife and children, who apparently missed him quite badly while he was in England. The moving portrait, which you can see linked in the lecture, was made while he was home in Basel for a very short 2 years before returning to England. While Holbein is best remembered among Tudor portraitists, Lavina Benning Teirlinck was held in high esteem by the Tudor court. Although Henry VIII called her his favorite artist, and she made many portraits of the Princess Elizabeth before she became queen and after, Teirlinck's legacy is largely forgotten. As we've discussed before, due to institutionalized sexism, the memories of women artists are often lost to us and their artworks attributed to their male contemporaries. That concludes this week's lecture. Next week, we'll explore the 17th century in Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands in the era known as the Baroque.